Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Well, gossip has always been seen as a disruptive force within the workplace, but a new analysis has discovered that gossiping at work can actually deliver benefits for an organisation. Allison Howell is the Vice President of Market Innovation with Hogan Assessments, and she joins us now to tell us why. Allison, before you explain how gossip can actually be good for an organisation, remind us about Hogan Assessments and what your role in the company entails.
Hogan Assessments is a U.S.-based company that makes personality assessments for the workplace, and we use them for all different types of applications, from recruitment to employee and leadership development. My role at Hogan is as VP of Market Innovation. I oversee our product development and our marketing channels.
So gossip has often been seen as a disruptive force within the workplace environment. So what prompted Hogan Assessments to analyse this particular area?
Well, we are really curious about personality and what drives people. So gossip is sort of the natural output of people. And I think it's really interesting to see how gossip appears in the workplace, motivations people might have to engage in gossip, and how personality can play a role with that.
So why do people engage in gossip?
There's lots of different reasons. And, gossip is ever present. It kind of gets a bad rap, but it's really important and is really kind of everywhere in the workplace. So the reasons can be there are multiple, really. It's for kind of creating social links, establishing trust. Anytime that there are sort of gaps in official communication around different business activities, I think it's natural for people to try to fill in the information. I think there's different valences of gossip as well. There's malicious gossip to spread rumors or to maybe climb the social ladder at the expense of other people. There's neutral gossip that is really more about just information sharing and trying to understand what's happening within an organization. And gossip can be a positive force as well, and sharing information that might not be seen, providing recognition for people that might not be provided through official channels.
So what were the key findings of your analysis of this area?
That gossip can really be a useful tool. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of times there are gaps in official communication that comes down from leadership. Decisions might be made without a real clear explanation as to why these decisions are made, or what the additional context is. And so gossip can really fill in those gaps and help people to understand what's happening. I think it's really beneficial as well for creating the relationships with people. If you are working with somebody who tends to be in the know and really has their finger on the pulse, it can be a really valuable resource for other employees to understand what's going on and kind of keep a finger on the pulse of what's happening within an organization.
And was the analysis able to determine how prevalent workplace gossip is in organizations today?
Yeah, it's really ever present. We've seen upwards of 90% of employees engaging in gossip. I suspect it's actually even higher than that because of just our social tendency to talk about social issues. And so what people deem as gossip might have a more of a narrow definition than what is actually true gossip. So I would say it's somewhere between 90 and 100% of employees engage in gossip at some point in the workplace.
And what's the mix between positive and negative gossip?
Skews more negative, certainly. I think everyone loves a scandal of whatever nature. And so I think it's really easy for gossip to kind of devolve into more of the negative. But I think if there's a really large proportion of it that is actually just more informational in nature. I'd say it's less likely to have more of the positive gossip depending on the work environment. But a lot of times I think gossip is really viewed as this information sharing, help people to understand what is happening within an organization. It doesn't necessarily have to be positive or negative. It's just helping people kind of make sense of the world around them.
I do want to get into detail around how helpful it can be, because I'm sure many of our listeners might be surprised by that. But before we get into that, talk to us about how remote working has impacted gossip in the workplace.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that this is something that will be studied for a while because it's really impacted the ways that we communicate with each other. When people are in the office, of course, it's easy to go and grab a coffee, grab a water, walk and kind of talk about what happened that day or debrief from a meeting or talk about what your coworkers were doing. Remote environment, those interactions are much more prescribed. They're not quite as casual because you're not crossing paths with them on the way to the bathroom. I think the ways in which gossip has changed is it's moved online. You're less likely to just call up a coworker and say, okay, guess what happened, unless it's something really quite shocking or juicy. So it requires a little bit of a different step. But I think anyone who's using Teams or Zoom for everyday communication, you can see people who might be having side chats or having some commentary around the meeting. So I don't think it's necessarily disappeared. I just think that the ways in which we're sharing information has changed. And with that, the information flow might have changed a little bit as well, that you're speaking more frequently to one or two people versus a larger number of people who you might cross paths with in the office.
And I suppose traditionally gossiping in the workplace had negative connotations with professional reputational damage attached to being perceived as a gossip. But what are the benefits associated with gossip at work?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I think gossip really is seen as a negative thing, and oftentimes there's actually a somewhat of a gendered lens through that, where women can very quickly develop the reputation of being a gossip in the office and sharing information. But I think it's much more beneficial to think about gossip as just another information channel. And people will always gossip. People will always bond over frustrations that they might have at work. And it's not helpful to try to stifle that necessarily, but rather thinking of it as a way to kind of gauge the mood, gauge the overall ambiance of the workforce, and you can kind of see trends in where frustrations might be. So if you're able to use it as a little bit of a listening tool. I'm a manager of a fair amount of people, and I've noticed that in my role as a leader, I get less and less gossip as my role progresses, and I really feel like I'm at a deficit when I'm not getting the gossip, because there's all sorts of things that happen throughout the day, and if you're not kind of being looped into what's happening, it makes it really hard to kind of gauge where your employees might be at, what their overall engagement levels might be. So it can be really beneficial to kind of listen and try to understand. I think as a leader as well, you want to be careful with how you engage with gossip, but it is a good way to build trust, depending on what information you're willing to share. But if you're able to kind of have some openness, some open dialogue that's outside of official channels, that can really help foster the relationships you have with others.
So how can managers harness gossip as a team management tool?
Well, I think a lot of it is just sort of establishing trust with one another. As a manager, of course, you don't want to engage in spreading false rumors or criticizing other people openly. But I think there's an element of establishing psychological safety as a manager, because you can open up lines of communication. Employees might be able to feel more comfortable coming to you with issues that avoid talking to a manager about. Gossip might be just sharing little bits of information, sharing some context of a meeting or a decision that happened to help people feel a little bit more comfortable. And establishing that trust with one another can help your employees come and feel like they can talk to you and develop that relationship with you.
And should rules be put in place to monitor the topics that may be subject to gossip in an organisation?
That's a tough question. I think by and large, no. Implementing rules can really run the risk of backfiring. I think, if you think about a workplace where they implement some sort of no gossiping rule, that really stifles communication, that can damage the relationships that you form with other coworkers, that can, damage the overall team functioning if you're able to do that. Of course, I think there are also lines with which you can't tolerate spreading harmful rumors or engaging in bullying by way of gossip. I think that there needs to be a no-tolerance policy to certain more extreme forms of gossip. But being too controlling over the way employees communicate, I think, is really going to be damaging to morale overall.
So I'm thinking about it in the context of, let's say, a workplace WhatsApp group, that there would be almost a code of conduct in place in relation to what's allowed and what's not allowed.
I think that provides some really good guidelines, and I think maybe that's where it is. You want to provide some guidelines of what's expected of behavior, but it's more the guidelines than rules that need to be enforced or are punished.
They say when it comes to culture within an organisation, it only takes one bad egg to destroy the overall positive culture within an organisation. So in that respect, if a company is promoting gossiping, how do you control it from a negative perspective?
That's a great question, because it is true. When you have toxic employees, that can really start to have a cooling effect on the rest of the team. And so trying to monitor that is really important. And so I think one of the strategies that a manager can use is really leaning into techniques around creating psychological safety. If it's not something that you as a manager observe directly of somebody who is creating that toxicity, it's important for the other employees to feel comfortable to come and say, okay, this happened, and establishing some norms around what's acceptable.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Allison Howell, Vice President of Market Innovation with Hogan Assessments, and it was interesting to hear a different perspective on gossip in the workplace. We're heading over next to the Wexford News Centre for the news at 11, but when we return, Nicola Harkin from IBEC discusses pay transparency, auto-enrolment pensions, and the treatment of independent contractors as employees. So do stay tuned for that.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.